Welcome to MLK Manifesting the Dream, an annual program of We the World to carry forward the work and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To learn more and get involved, please go to we.net/MLK. My name is Rick Ulfik, and I am the founder of We the World and the We campaign at we.net. We the World is an international coalition building organization that unites and promotes the efforts of people, organizations, and movements working for the common good. Now, as we honor Martin Luther King Jr., I am excited that we will have a conversation with Michael Wayne, who is the producer of the documentary film How to Save Democracy. We will consider how the work of MLK continues to be crucial today. For example, MLK worked to address racism and expand people's civil rights. His work is really crucial now as we see mass deportation happening, targeting Black and Brown immigrant populations, devastating families and terrorizing communities. And we are witnessing the targeting and dismantling of crucial public programs and agencies like the Department of Education, which is responsible for about $18 billion in Title I funding for high poverty schools. All this defunding of programs that serve the public is likely designed to give huge tax cuts to the wealthiest people in the world. So MLK's work continues on, especially as the USA is now facing a very real and expanding threat to democracy. Now I'm excited that we will hear from Michael Wayne. Michael Wayne, Ph.D., L.Ac, is an author of 5 books, a filmmaker and co-host and producer of the series Voices for the Future. He is a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, and he is the producer of a documentary feature film, How to Save Democracy. Michael Wayne, could you please speak about how your work connects with MLK's longstanding concerns and society's current challenges? And welcome to MLK Manifesting the Dream, Michael Wayne.
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you for that great introduction and introduction of me. It's truly an honor to be able to talk with you today on such an important and relevant topic as MLK Manifesting the Dream. Since you mentioned my film, How to Save Democracy, I'll just say a few words first about that, and then also tie it in with MLK Manifesting the Dream, his work, his vision, which are things I get into in my film too. I actually just finished the film a few weeks ago, so it's as we talk, it's not even out yet. So I'm gearing up to get the word out about the film and hopefully have organizations around the country host screenings for it. The truth is, and I pointed out in the film, democracy in the U.S. was not in good shape even before Trump arrived on the scene. And the Democracy Index has rated the U.S. as a flawed democracy for quite a while now. I think it's like 10 years. And so my film looks at how democracy got broken in the U.S., both from a political and economic standpoint, and it looks at the solutions to get us back on the right track. So about MLK, I'll talk about MLK's work, and then I'll tie it in with my film too. MLK's dream and his vision was a multiracial of all of us living in a multiracial democracy, multiracial nation, social justice, and also economic justice and economic democracy. Yet he wasn't deluding himself. He knew that democracy was flawed, and he worked hard to help the U.S. realize its aspirations of democracy encoded in the Declaration of Independence, of Jefferson's immortal words that all men are created equal. Of course, that has never been true since the birth of the US, as only certain people have full access to the aspirational promise of American democracy, while so many people are shut out from it. And as you talked in the introduction, Rick, talking about the deportations, it's just, it's even worse in many ways. And so Martin Luther King's work was in two phases. The first was orienting the country towards that multiracial nation by ending segregation and ending Jim Crow laws. And he accomplished this, or he worked at that through the actions he and his allies helped lead. And then the second phase was creating an economic democracy. And MLK advocated for economic democracy, which he believed was essential to racial equality and a just society. And he believed that everyone should have the opportunity to work with dignity and support their families. And I'll just say a few words, just going into the weeds, just quickly on his vision of economic justice. There was an economic Bill of Rights. King's led the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, which proposed a federal anti-poverty package that included guaranteed incomes and more low-income housing. And the Poor People's Campaign continues through the work of Reverend William Barber and others. King also, part of that economic vision, was advocating for food aid, advocating for expanded food aid programs. He advocated for anti-poverty legislation. He believed that hunger was a moral failing of society and that urgent policy solutions were needed. And he also advocated, as part of his economic justice vision, economic redistribution. He believed that economic redistribution of wealth was necessary. But MLK wasn't the first to advocate for economic justice. The United States has gone through many periods when the level of economic injustice, wealth inequality was obscene. During the Gilded Age was a prime example. And coming out of the Gilded Age, the Progressive Era, one of the leaders of the Progressive Era, who became a Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, once said, "We can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both." And that those words are really relevant today, as we're seeing, the tech oligarchs really what they're doing. And then in 1944, looking at this historically, I mentioned Louis Brandeis, President Franklin Roosevelt, in a televised address, gave his second Bill of Rights speech, which was an economic Bill of Rights. He laid out, what would be fair for everybody: right to a job, a right to enough remuneration, everything. Unfortunately, he died a year after his speech, so his vision never came to fruition. But ironically, after World War II, the United States, in helping to rebuild Europe through the implementing the Marshall Plan, they brought many ideas of economic justice to Europe, which were adopted by European countries, and that's where European countries became social democracies. And so MLK's work against racism, systemic racism, came to fruition to a certain level in the 1960s with the signing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a landmark law that outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. and it was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson on July 2nd, 1964. And then the next year, in August 6th of 65, Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, which ensured that no federal, state, or local government could in any way impede people from voting because of their race or ethnicity. Before that, there were so many barriers to people voting, and most of them generally were racial barriers, discriminatory practices in voting, literary tests, poll taxes, and so on. In my film, I show a short clip of a woman, an elderly woman, a black woman, saying how in Mississippi she had to pay $2 to vote, and then she said white people paid nothing. So it eliminated all those things. Um, and so the nation, from that point on, the nation uneasily moved forward towards towards some sort of uh, multiracial democracy. But it's over the last 15 years, and these are things I talk about in my film too, with the experts I have interviewed, that things started to unravel in 2010. There were the Voting Rights Act became was unraveled in 2013. Um, and so all these three things from 2010 through 2013 have really put the U.S. In a trajectory and its to its current anti-democratic nature. And granted, the institutions of the U.S., the Constitution, Congress, the Electoral College, the way we vote, the two-party system, and more they've always led or created a certain level of anti-democratic functioning in America, but it's over these last 15 years that things have accelerated and unraveled fully and leading to what we're witnessing almost feels like a final chapter, crossroads. And I would I would think MLK is rolling in his grave to know what's going on with as especially with the two things he worked so hard on, creating this multiracial democracy and an economic democracy falling by the wayside. So the three things, and as I said, I go into it in my film. The three things began unraveling 2010, first with a Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, which unleashed unlimited amounts of money, especially what's called dark money, money that cannot be traced, and it's not known who's giving the money, into elections, which influenced how elections turn out. Most of the dark money has gone into funding extreme right-wing politicians. The second unraveling occurred also in 2010. This was an intentional program by the Republican Party, what they called Red Map, which stands for Redistricting Majority Project, which was the creation of wildly gerrymandered districts in states all around the country that allowed them to gain control of state legislatures and the House of Representatives, and goes on to this day. And the upshot of that is even when a state votes majority for Democrats, or even 50-50 for Democrats, or Republicans by small margin, Republicans, because of this wild gerrymandering, would win the majority of House seats in a state or majority of seats in the state legislature, and often by a large margin. Like I think North Carolina might be one of those 50-50 states, but they might have three-quarters of their House districts are Republicans. And then the third unraveling, and this directly related to MLK's work, which I mentioned, the Voting Rights Act, and it was another SCOTUS ruling in 2013 in the case of Shelby County versus Holder, and the ruling has been called one of the worst rulings ever by the Supreme Court because it eviscerated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act had a measure in it called pre-clearance, which stated that if a state wanted to change any election laws, they had to get approval from the federal government. This was to stop poll tax and literacy tax and any sort of disenfranchising efforts. And the SCOTUS ruling immediately struck down pre-clearance, allowing states to do whatever they want. And immediately states in the South changed law. They had laws on the books just waiting for this date when the Supreme Court eviscerated the Voting Rights Act, and it made it harder for certain people to vote, like voter ID and just all kinds of ways to make it hard, closing polling places, having polling places be miles and miles away. And it disenfranchised huge swaths of the population, and primarily minorities and young people. And so it's anywhere from millions to tens of millions of people can no longer vote or have it really hard to vote. Um, and this is what we're seeing now. We're paying the price for it because we're a majority liberal country, but we're seeing what's going on is we're currently in the throes of what's called a tyranny of the minority. That's not my term. That's a well-known term. And what it means is it's where the minority, just like it says, the minority rules the majority. And as I said earlier, the institutions of the United States are pretty much oriented towards the tyranny of the minority already, or the makeup of the House, the makeup of the Senate, the Electoral College, the filibuster, and many other things. And so with what we're seeing now is people with a very distorted view of what democracy is, or even more specifically, don't even believe democracy is relevant anymore, are now in power and holding the reins of power. Peter Thiel, who's one of the people behind the scenes, one of the tech oligarchs whose dystopic vision is coming to fruition, said a number of years ago, he said he no longer believes freedom and democracy are compatible. So so this is like the effort, like from a Star Wars analogy. It's the Empire Strikes Back, and it's just shocking for all of us to see the swiftness of this. But this was plotted out in advance. Project 2025. This is Project 2025 being put into action. So it's we all have to be aware of it and be ready, rise up and to stop it.
Yeah, wow. It's very informative. I
Thank you.
I appreciate everything that you are talking about. And I just must say that your film is really crucial now, given the current unfolding situation in the USA, as you were talking about and I've been talking about. So I'm wondering if you can talk about your perspective from a particular vantage point that I've been thinking about. I have a particular concern about the overall goals reflected by the flood of firings of workers at agencies and other places, and all the time that the legal reactions to these injunctions and appeals, et cetera, will take. It seems like this is a playbook that we've seen being used in places like Hungary, where judges and others were fired and quickly replaced by people loyal to the autocrat. The legal proceedings and appeals and all those other things related to the firing took so long that they were no longer relevant because the new loyal judges and other leaders had already started making substantial changes to their society that could not be undone. So, what do you think, Michael? Is that same scenario possible in the USA?
Sinclair Lewis, the writer Sinclair Lewis, wrote a popular novel. It Can't Happen Here. It was a book written during the 1930s and the tumultuous times of those, especially Lewis had an eye on what was going on in Europe and Germany and Italy, the fascist movement. So it's a satire in which it starts to arise here. So again, your question is, can it happen here? Um, and it's good that you mentioned Hungary, Rick, because the Heritage Foundation, which is behind Project 2025, is in a very synergistic relationship with Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, and the Hungarian government. They've hosted Orban here, they've gone there. They've had the CPAC, which is connected with Heritage Foundation. And, this has been brewing for decades. One of the people I interviewed for my film, David Daly, who wrote a book called Rat Eft, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count. He wrote, that was his first book on wild gerrymandering. His most recent book is Anti-Democratic, the 50-year plot to control America's elections. I think that's the name of it. So he's very thorough in his research. He's not a conspiracy theorist when he uses the word plot, but he talks about how this has been brewing for a long time. It's been the long game, and it's and these people they're shrewd, they're diabolical, and their aim, and part of it is racist, part of it is Christian uh, fundamentalist, and some of it's just power. Some of it is the money that the kleptocratic fever dream that could possibly come from it, not possibly, will come from it. So there's a combination of things, and inherent with that is the anti-democratic nature of American institutions. So we need an American revival. And these are the things when the latter part of my film when I talk about solutions, because we need to revision how we want to live. And most of us, the majority of people want to live in an egalitarian, multiracial, multicultural America. Um, we don't want to go back to some mythical vision of when America was great. But, at the same time, we see the playbook, what Hungary did, what Orban did. He just got elected, and this is how that term illiberal democracy has come to, because the leaders are um, democratically elected. I mean, Putin was democratically elected. Now he just doesn't allow elections to really go on. But Orban was democratically elected, and then he changed the judiciary, changed rules in the Constitution. And so he's still abiding theoretically by the rule of law, except he's written the law. I think that can happen here in certain ways, because the level Americans are much wiser, and we will continue to rise up. And historically, this is not probably, this is the worst constitutional crisis since the Civil War in America. America was torn apart, almost fully torn apart by the Civil War, and it never fully, to this day, hasn't fully healed the wounds um, of that era. After the Civil War, Reconstruction began, and slaves were reinstated as citizens, and some states and cities had majority black legislatures, councils, and then Jim Crow laws, the ugliness of Jim Crow laws and white supremacy changed so much of that. Um, but you know as MLK said, the arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. So we have to see it as a long game and to bend towards justice. In the that was horrifying what happened with Jim Crow laws, and in the South, it was just slavery by another name, and people who were freed people, would be arrested for infractions, put on a chain gang, and made to work back on the same plantations they worked on as slaves. So they were still back in slavery in a different way, and that took from the end of the Civil War in 1865, 100 years, to 1960, 64, 65, to law signing. And that took a lot of actions, civil disobedience, to change that. But also historically, I mentioned the Gilded Age, and that changed again by the groundswell of dissent, because the wealth levels of wealth inequality were horrifying. Tens of millions of people lived in poverty, and a small group of people were the robber barons who were wealthy beyond anybody's dreams. And one of those robber barons, J.P. Morgan, in 1907, the United States had one of their often financial crashes in 1907, and Morgan lent the country the money to keep it afloat. So he was like the Musk of that day. I mean, imagine you lend the country, you get to have your say. But but the tides were against him in the during this progressive era as labor reforms, the income tax was set, a Federal Reserve was set, women were given the right to vote eventually, 1919, 1920. So a lot of changes happened. And then again, the Republicans swept back into power throughout the 1920s, gave the financial industry free rein, and eventually, 9 years in 1929, they crashed the economy. And at that point, another oligarch was the financial brains behind everything, Andrew Mellon, who was the Treasury Secretary throughout the 1920s. And he he got in the president at the time, Herbert Hoover, who served from 1920, got elected in 1928 and got booted out in the election in 1932. But he convinced Hoover, and Hoover probably already believed we should not be helping people, let people pull themselves up by the bootstraps as people were starving and struggling and lost whatever money their savings. And so that turned into another transformative era when Roosevelt came in, and it took a number of years, but Roosevelt, right from the start, was ready to change the tenor of government, and he ushered in the New Deal. He put reins on the banks, made sure they couldn't just do whatever they want. He told them, the bankers hated him, and he said, "I welcome your hatred." And unemployment insurance, Social Security, so many things. And as I pointed out when I was talking earlier, he wasn't done. In 1944, he put forth that Economic Bill of Rights, and he didn't live to see it. But that New Deal era lasted from Roosevelt's time in the 1930s all the way through the late 70s. I mean, the racial inequality was the stain on it, but then with MLK's work, racial inequality came to the surface, and then he was a strong influence on Lyndon Johnson, and Johnson read the tea leaves and had this vision. Johnson did great things and did horrible things with the Vietnam War, but the great things, he had that vision of the Great Society. And it was kind of like the continuation of the New Deal. And that continued, and it was all about government is there to serve people, to help people, and can invest in the people. And we'll rise up again. We will. I mean, just seeing what's already happening, how people are acting, resisting, writing, talking in all ways. Um,
Yep. And we're dealing with it in whatever way we can, right? Like having this conversation.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Given everything that you've been saying and the challenges our society is facing, do you have a specific call to action that you'd like to share? And
Um, well, I'll plug my films. That's the
good.
call to action is watching. But as I said, it's just we're just getting it going on the ground for people to view it. So I hope as we do screenings, we'll also have questions and answers, and good work will come out of that. So that's the film is called How to Save Democracy, and the website is savingdemocracyfilm.com. But then there's a number of organizations. Oh, and also I'll say before I name the organizations that already have sprung up, there's also something called, maybe you've talked about this, Rick, before, I imagine perhaps, something called the 3.5% rule, you know, which says that when 3.5% of the population, and then we talk about this in my film, 3.5% of the population rise up in civil and nonviolent actions, they are successful. And as we talk about in the film, it's probably 1% of the population. So we're looking at anywhere from 3 million to 10 million people. And I think I think that we're on the way towards that. So there's so I would, another call to action is just in whatever way you can to just be a part of this, be a part of something, whether it's just with friends, family, community, or joining a movement. And speaking of movements, there's some actions have started. Perhaps people have heard about them. There's been, to this date, there's been two demonstrations around the country, and there are two organizations that I've come across that, with websites and names. One is 5050.one. It's 50, the organization's called 5051. So it's 5050.one, and that stands for 50 protests, 50 states, one movement. And the other organization is unifymovements.org. And both these organizations list their partners on their website, and Unify Movements is about many movements coming together. And I think what people have to understand, and this is part of my film too, is what is our vision for what we want to create? MLK manifesting the dream is part of that, creating that egalitarian, multiracial country with economic democracy. So I think it's so important for people to envision how, not only how to change it, but what it is that we're looking to change, and how do we create multiracial and egalitarian, both politically and economically, to be something, a society that's more collaborative and cooperative together.
Exactly. And of course, that's the philosophy and the the strategy and the mission of We the World. That's why
Yeah,
it's called We the World. It's, imagine the world coming together to solve its uh, problems in a way that works for everyone, right?
yeah. Yeah, so your organization is so important. I mean, it's so great that you had the vision, when you did to start this organization, and just, now you've gained a lot of steam as you've been doing this for 20.
Over 25 years at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah. So, yeah, without coming together, we're stronger together than apart. And Charles Darwin, who can't say he discovered the the theories of evolution. He kind of synthesized it, but he's mistakenly said, "Oh, his ideas are survival of the fittest." That was never his idea. It was what he called the sympathy hypothesis, that societies, that humans, that all beings and societies thrive when they work together. And we see this historically with all societies. Societies thrive and some fail, and they fail when a segment, which is always very small, wants it all for themselves. And they thrive when they all work together.
Exactly, exactly. So this has been really informative. Thank you so much,
Oh, thank
uh,
you, Rick.
Michael Wayne, for being part of MLK Manifesting the Dream. And you know what this is? This
Yeah.
is a W, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's all about we, right? All of us together, which is really another way of talking about MLK's beloved community, right? That's what we is all about. So let's go from a me society, right, to a we society. And of course,
Yeah,
that's why we launched we.net. So
yeah,
thank you,
you're
and
right.
thank all of you who are watching this so much. And thank you for getting involved in whatever way you can think of and works for you to make this a better world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the work you do, especially.
Thank you.